Hello everybody, welcome back to Photo Beast, where we try to help everybody with all things photography. Today I wanted to go over some stuff with Photo Talk in episode 2 here about acquiring better target acquisition and why ISO can either be your friend or your foe. So without further ado, let's get into it. Over here, this is an AR-15 chambered in 5.56-223, and this is set up for close quarter combat, or what we would call CQB. You got flip up sights, you've got a small red dot, and over here we have a flashlight slash laser, which, like I said, is great for close quarter combat. Without good sights, this thing would not be as great as it is. This is the Ruger Precision Rifle. This thing is just around 20 pounds with the optic on it. This is a really good piece of glass. This is the Athlon Aries ETR glass on here with MOA turrets. This is chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. 6.5 Creedmoor is a really good round for shooting long distances. The reason why this gun is as big and heavy as precise is because it's for shooting targets, I guess you could say, 1,000 yards and beyond. They do make this in different rounds like 308, 338 Lapua, 300 Win Mag, things like that. But the point of shooting something like this, and what I'm getting at, and why we're talking about guns and photography, or precision rifles for that matter, is because when you shoot targets that far away, we'll say 1,000 yards, one of the things you have to do is calculate distance. There's a thing called the Aureolus effect, where the Earth rotation affects actually how you shoot, as well as windage. So there's a lot of math and some science and physics that definitely go into shooting. The whole point of having good target acquisition is not to take your eye off your optic, because if you do all this math and physics and science and stuff, and you set everything up and you take your eye off the target, when you go back to shoot, you can miss your next shot. Now, what does that have to do with photography, you may ask? Well, if I'm shooting the 500mm f4 with my Canon R5 and I'm panning and I'm chasing an eagle in flight, I don't have my settings set up on my camera properly. I would have to take my eye off the viewfinder, change settings, and then when I put my eye back to the viewfinder, I would have to re-find the target, which causes you to lose time, lose pictures, and that could be the shot that could make or break your day. And that's why having really good target acquisition in photography really helps. In the end, all these things are tools, and you want your tools to basically work for you, you not work for them. So with that said, the whole point of all this is to set your camera up in a reasonable way that works for you so that you can have better target acquisition. The only difference is when you shoot rifles, you're shooting a projectile. When you shoot a camera, you're gathering light. Hence the word photography, which is Greek for gathering of light, or painting with light. And that's what we do. We take light, we bring it in, and we paint with it. Moving on to that, the best way to get your camera to work for you and you not work for it is basically to kiss. We need to simplify things sometimes. And what I like to do is every camera, what I have in the house right now is I have an RP, I have the R5, R6 Mark II, R7, and R8. Every camera is set up pretty consistent to each other across the board. And what I mean by that is I have the front wheel set up for shutter, which most Canon cameras, that comes out of the box with your shutter. And then the back wheel, if the camera has one, for instance on this, which one's this? This is the R6 Mark II. It has an aperture wheel and a wheel on the back. So this has 3 wheels. Now some cameras, like the R7, only have 2 wheels. So even though this has 3 wheels and this has 2 wheels, when I'm shooting wildlife photography, they're consistent in the sense that I use the wheel in the front for shutter and the wheel in the back, whether it's the high up one on the R7, which I actually like the placement of, by the way, or the R6 II, the wheel at the bottom, or even the R5, which is pretty similar to the R6 II. And what I'll do is this is shutter and this will be exposure compensation. I'll set up shutter for here. If it has a second wheel at the top, I'll keep that wheel for aperture. And when I'm shooting wildlife, I shoot manual mode, auto ISO, exposure compensation. I go into the menu, and a lot of times your exposure compensation will be, which means if you're in auto ISO, it can go to 25,600 or 51,200, which is extremely high, and we don't want to do that. We want to cap it off to what your camera can usually allow. And with anything in the Canon mirrorless line, whether it's the R7, R6, R5, or even the RP, which I'm filming on right now, 12,800 is usually the highest number that I will take any pictures with. If I have to go higher than that, I will significantly drop my shutter speed. We're going to get to high ISOs in a minute and how ISO can either be your friend or foe after we get to some of the professional settings here. The whole purpose of these settings is to keep you on track with your target acquisition. And the way it is shutter exposure compensation, and cap that off at 12,800. And what that allows you to do is, as you're taking pictures, if the subject's moving fast, you can roll your shutter up. If the subject is going slower or stationary, you can roll it back and bring it down to like 1/250th of a second or 1/500th of a second. The bird goes back into flight. You can roll it up to 1/2000th or 1/2500th of a second. So it's that easy. The wheel on the back is just as easy. And this wheel, once you use it for just exposure compensation, make sure you put your histogram on at the time. And when your histogram is on, make sure it goes into small mode, because every Canon camera does have a histogram. That histogram by default is going to be large, and they'll ask you, do you want it large or small? So go into your menu and make that small, and always use your histogram, because once you blow out your highlights, they are not recoverable. You have lost that information. Once information is lost, we can't obtain it back again unless we retake the shot, which is impossible once you get home. So we have our shutter, we have our exposure compensation. So all I have to think about is composition now. Because if my bird is sitting still, I can go slow. If it's going fast, I go fast. Then I have to ask myself, is the scene from what I see and the histogram comparable to what I'm seeing through here? And as I'm looking at the scene, if I need to bring my exposure up, I just give it a little slide to the right. Or if I need to bring the exposure down, I bring it to the left. Also, if your ISO you feel is too high for that situation and you need to bring the exposure down, it also brings your ISO down, which is another great feature of having exposure compensation on. Now, me personally, for instance, this is the RF 100 to 500. The lowest possible aperture is f7.1. I'm going to shoot at f7.1, even though it might not be the sharpest aperture in the world for this lens. It might be f9, it might be f11. But I always use the lowest possible aperture because it allows more light to come in and allows me to use faster shutter speeds. And in the case of wildlife photography, where things are a lot different than portraits, your subject in portraiture photography, you're in control of. You tell your subject how to sit. Your lighting, you're in control of. Your backdrops, you're in control of. When you're out in the field, you guys know what I'm talking about. You wildlife photographers, your subject, most likely a bird, doesn't want its picture taken. You have no control over the lighting. God makes that, and if we get a bright sunny day, we get one. If it rains, it rains. We cannot control the weather. And third, we can't control the background. One thing we can control about the backgrounds is where we position ourselves, because I've taken better images than people around me or in my surrounding area because they're directly shooting this way, and I'll try to look or position myself in the best way to get the most pleasing background. And so just kind of be aware of your surroundings if you have time. Sometimes the birds land and fly off, so you don't even have time to do that. But these are things and techniques that we learn over time to thus become better photographers. And I'm a firm believer that doing wildlife photography actually makes you a better portrait photographer, or landscape photographer for that matter, because you learn a lot of things while you're doing wildlife photography. So you learn perseverance, patience, you learn settings, and one of the things that I learned about in the settings is customizing stuff to make my life easier, and that's why I want to share these features with you today. So once you've got your shutter and your exposure compensation set up, there's some other little things or tips and tricks that I can give you on a pro level. You've got 3 buttons on the back of every camera that comes from Canon. These 3 buttons are usually in a row together, except for the R7, which has one here, and then one a little bit further down. And what I like to do is the first button usually comes now, that didn't come like this back in the day with DSLRs, but you need to set it up for back button autofocus. Once you've got that set up, you usually, in the case like right here, let me show you. So let's set this up here, and as you can see, there's single point, this is 9 point, and this is basically the whole area autofocus, or what they call zone autofocus. So I have single point, 9 point, and then I'm in the zone. And the reason why I use 3 different autofocus points is because a lot of times I'll keep my back button autofocus with a single point or a 9-point, depending on what type of photography I'm doing. For instance, I'll have a single point if birds are flying and they're landing in a bunch of branches. And you have a bird and there's branches all over the place. You can use the single point to lock on the bird. And then once you do, have the button just to the right of that one set up for eye autofocus or AI eye detection. And what that does is once you have the single point locked on the bird, you hit the eye, the camera now knows that, hey, this is my subject, let me find its eyeball. And then as the bird moves around the branch, the eye autofocus most of the time will do a great job following your subject around, and then you can get your, the pictures that you need at that moment. Now, if the birds are in flight, that's when you would want to use the 9-point or the zone autofocus areas, and then you can just hit that button and switch between them. Now, by default, you're going to have about 7 of them or so cut on, so I recommend going in the settings and shutting those off as well, and that will make your life a lot easier. So now, here we go with target acquisition again, and this is the key here. I can keep my eye on the viewfinder at all times. I can look at the bird, I can go fast, slow, darker, brighter, and I can also lock on the bird, lock on the bird's eyeball, and change my autofocus points. All of this being done without taking my eye off the viewfinder or taking my eyes off the bird or the subject. And that gives you better target acquisition, which gives you better chances at getting the shot that you deserve to get. Now, that's photography. What about video? How can we customize our camera to get photos and videos without taking our eye off the viewfinder? And it's simple. For instance, with this Canon R5 here, we're going to look at the top of it. You've got a little red button, puts you into video mode. That little red button, automatically, for one, I usually shoot with customizable settings. I do shoot in manual, but I use C1, C2. C1 for me is for wildlife, and C2 is for weddings or events. And the only thing is, my eye detection is a little bit different. I still use the same servo and pretty much the same settings, but one's for animals and one's for people, so I can click over, okay? One's with faster shutter speeds, one's with slower shutter speeds. That's the only difference. Now, if I'm in C1, which is manual mode, programmed on my camera here, if I was to push the red button, it automatically turns on video mode C3. So what you need to do is go into your camera and go to video mode and program C3 for 60 frames, or in the case of this camera, I do 120 frames a second in 4K. So now, if I'm taking pictures and I want to get some B-roll, without taking my eye off the viewfinder, I can push the red button and now I've got 4K 120 frames a second B-roll. That's great, but what if I need A-roll or just regular 24 frames a second? Not a problem. With my eye on the viewfinder, I can turn 120 on and off. All I have to do now is designate my manual function button to turn on video. So by going into my settings, I go to my buttons and my dials, and I go down to the button menu. On the button menu, take your multi-function button and program that to turn on video. When it turns on video, your C1 customization in video mode, just program that to 24 frames a second. So now as I'm taking pictures, if I want B-roll, I hit the red button. If I'm taking pictures and I want to go into video mode and film some beautiful scenes with the birds chirping and whatnot, I hit multifunction and then I hit record. So with a push of just 2 buttons, I'm now recording straight up video. I can hit the red button, turn it off again, hit multifunction, and now I'm back in photo mode and I'm taking my burst shots again. Now I want some B-roll, I just hit the red button. And now I'm filming B-roll. Without taking my eyes off, I hit the red button again, I turn it off, and I'm back in photo mode again. And it's that simple. You can customize these cameras to make it so that you never have to take your eye off the viewfinder, thus never missing any of the shots that count at the end of the day, making you a better photographer. So I hope some of this helps. Now, without further ado, let's go over to the monitor here, and I want to show you the 12,000 ISO and the reason why I say cap off at 12,000. Now, before I go there, I do want to bring up the fact about 2 weeks ago I made a video, and it was Photo Talk episode 1. There was a couple people trying to harass in the comment section, and I asked you if you watch any of these videos. I started Photo Beast because my wife called me a photo beast because I go out in the rain and the mud and the muck, and she thought it was a cute little name. And anybody that tries in the photo world is a photo beast. If you try and the odds are against you and you're going against everything and you're the underdog in your situation and you just keep trying. For instance, this video I try to make today, this is the 8th attempt because of interruptions and things, but I don't give up. Just keep persevering and get what you're going after, and you can do it. So that's what the whole Photo Beast channel is about. It's not just a me channel. It is a family of photographers that are all here to basically communicate and help each other. And that's what this is. I wanted to make an institution where we can just look out for each other, help each other with just collective criticisms and, you know, just little pointers, tips, and tricks. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is helping your brothers and sisters that are in need. And, you know, those of us that have been around for a few years, we can share what we've learned to help them get to where we're at now, because we're always learning. No matter how long you've been doing this, there's always more to learn, and technologies are always changing. So with that said, a guy told me a couple weeks ago I need to find a new career path because I took a picture of my dog with ISO, what was it, ISO 25,600. Now, when I bought the R6 Mark II, I brought it home, took it out of the box, and there was nothing to take a picture of but my dog over on the couch, and I burst like 4 shots of him real quick. By default, the camera was on 25,600 on ISO. I went outside, shot some birds, brought the SD card back in, threw it in, and I saw those pictures were a little grainy, but his eye was sharp, and I could still see his fur. Now, there's a reason for that, and I'm going to show you right here. So while I was at Jordan Lake Dam a few weeks ago, during that time, the R5 I put on my side, and I was just overpacked with gear. And one of the things I did was I bumped my buttons, and this great blue heron came in and landed, and I brought my lens up real quick and took a few shots. Before I realized I was at ISO 12,800 and my shutter speed was a whopping 64 hundredths of a second, which I would never shoot in. My camera goes to 1/8 thousandths of a second. I've never taken a picture that fast. It's just ridiculously fast. But going on to the pictures here, they are a little overexposed because, like I said, my buttons got hit. If you've ever walked around with your camera, I had camera on one side, camera on the other side, a backpack on, and a tripod, and then I had a vlogging camera in front of me on this little tiny path. So when my buttons got hit and I brought up my camera, I was a little bit overexposed, and I, as you can see, was at ISO 12,800, which is ridiculously high for an image in the photography world. Well, is it usable is the question. Now, the cameras today, or the sensors on the cameras today, are not the sensors that we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 2 years ago for that matter. They continually are getting better and better. And one of the great things about doing bird photography is if you make a boo-boo or you make a mess up, you can just delete it. It's not for a paying client. So that's why wildlife photography really helps people out in the end. But I just wanted to show you a couple images that were at ISO 12,800. Here's one here. You can see 6400, like I explained. This image, it's a little overexposed, so if I bring this down, my highlights or whatever, you can see that it's sharp. You can still see the details of the fur, or I'm sorry, you can still see the details in the feathers, not fur. Birds don't have fur, do they? So let's hit enhance and let's just look and see some of the details. And I'll show you a couple more pictures real fast that I just lightly enhanced in Lightroom. As you can see, we go up here, look at the eyeball, and there's a reason for this. Look at that. The reason is, if you shoot your camera at a very fast shutter speed, right, on a subject that is well lit to begin with, will your ISO go up? Yes, it will. But in the gist of things, the subject was well lit to begin with. It had ample lighting on it. So even though it was a fast shot, or really fast shot in this case, the subject was lit enough that the ISO can be worked around. So sometimes when you're doing wildlife photography, you have to have a fast shutter speed and it will crank your ISOs up. Sometimes I have to have that 2000 shutter speed. And in order to do that, I have to have the 12,800 ISO. And that 12,800 ISO can be cleaned up later a lot of times and people don't know it. So I just wanted to show you this image here, and it hasn't even been sharpened yet. So if I added just a little pinch of clarity, went down to my tone curve, put some of the blacks back and brought some of the contrast back out in this little bird, go down to details, turn up my sharpening a little bit, hit the Alt key, you can see that this is a very, very sharp image. And it was at 12,800, and I've got quite a few of these. Like I said, this bird, I was walking down this narrow path, thorns and thistles were just raking themselves against me, ripping my clothes, poking me and everything, and I saw this little guy land right next to me. Like I said, all these are 12,800. You can see the little crust on his legs. You can see the details, the little crustaceans on his beak. While he's preening himself over here, you can see the little lines and details in the feathers. And if you can't, blame YouTube, because I'm telling you that this is a very, very sharp image, and it is 12,800 all day long. And that's the point I wanted to make. If you have ample lighting and you do use a fast shutter speed, 90% of the time you can bring that image back. It's just one of those things that the subject was well lit to begin with. And the only reason the ISO got cranked up is because of the shutter speed. So that is a time and place where high ISOs are usable. Now, on the flip side of that coin, I've taken images where the sun has went down beyond and behind the horizon and it's really dark out and my ISO's cranked up. I got some owl pictures a few weeks ago, and when you go to clean them up, there's just no detail there, and it's just one of those things. So anyways, guys, I hope some of the stuff in this video helped you. Put in the comments some of the tips and tricks that you use in wildlife photography. I'd like to see. I'm always trying to learn and you know, throw ideas around, and if you could throw some of your ideas out there, I would really appreciate it. Also, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, join the family, hit subscribe today, and also hit like so we can get this video shared as well as many other videos with as many people as possible. Other than that, I just want to thank each and every one of you guys for sticking through to the end, and thank you for hanging out with me this weekend. I love each and every one of you, and I hope y'all have some happy shooting in the next few weeks to come. I'll see y'all in the next video. Take care, and God bless. Until next time.